Hello and welcome. My name's Louise Hickson and I'm an Associate Dean in the Faculty of Health and Behavioural Sciences at the University of Queensland, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our first in a series of presentations by our experts in this faculty about various topics relevant to the current COVID-19 situation. I'll begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet today. And we're all in many different lands today, scattered around for a webinar. But on behalf of the faculty and the university, I pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. As I said, this is the first in our series, and we're delighted that you can join. The whole session today will take 30 minutes, with Veronique speaking for the first 20 to 25 minutes, and at the end, she's happy to respond to any questions. We think the best way to do this will be if you could write any questions you think of while she's talking into the chat, and as moderator, I'll keep an eye on those and I'll put them to Veronique after her presentation. So I hope that's okay. See if you can, you know where the chat function is, and if you can find it, then please put any questions in there. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Veronique Chachay. She has been at the University of Queensland since 2009, first as a PhD student, and then in 2013 she joined our academic staff in the School of Human Movements and Nutrition Sciences. She's an experienced dietitian who has most recently worked in a clinical setting at the Princess Alexandra Hospital in Brisbane. The topic today is very timely. It's about good nutrition at this particular point in the world's history when we're somewhat confined. So I'll hand over to you, Veronique.
Great, thank you very much, Louise, and good afternoon now, everybody. So, yes, well, when I sent my title, confinement was still up to date, obviously. And perhaps now, as we are unconfining, I don't know if that's a proper term, there is still the after confinement time, and many of us are still going to work from home. So there's a number of things that are still very relevant because this whole change of routine has obviously impacted on our health routine that we may have had really well sorted before we went into confinement. So before I move on to our actual topic or the program, I just want to mention that we have at the School of Human Movement and Nutrition Science, we've got a student clinic, meaning that our first year and second year master students, that's a master of Dietetic studies, need to practice as well. So they are on clinical placement in hospital setting when that is possible, but they also run what is called private practice sort of settings, and this is still happening and ongoing at the moment. And I'll make sure that the details will be available to you. So basically, when you get to this website, when you go to this address, you get to this page and you can request an appointment, and this is totally free of charge. And the appointment at the moment I made through Zoom, so very relevant as well to our situation. So we're going to point out some problems, or at least the problem that has been occurring to our health routine in the last, 8 weeks or so, and offer a solution, focusing on one main solution, and then of course coming up with a few tips to put that solution into practice. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is we have lost routine. We don't know, everything is out of whack. We work from home. We, some of us have children that they suddenly have to look after a lot more than what they would normally do when there is school and work. We end up spending a fair bit of time on the couch, watching TV, falling in front of the TV perhaps. And this can have some effect on our moods. We must have possibly started to feel all sorts of different unusual feelings, or more commonly, those feelings must have come through And primarily as well because we have uncertainty. We don't know for how long all this is going to take place. And we may have found that actually we are more sensitive to certain, besides COVID-19, which hopefully we didn't get, but other bugs, other things. We feel weaker, more lethargic, less energy. And so when there is this energy, then, well, we have the choice either to try to gather ourselves and get to do something to be proactive in our good health, or we can just go to our fridge and help ourselves and fill the fridge with lots of comfort foods that make us feel a little bit better for the minute, but after a while will also affect our waistline, because when we were super active and we were eating well, having a good routine, we were keeping that waistline under control, but then after that suddenly things start to expand. Now the outcomes of that, basically less exercise, more sitting around, leads to lethargy. So that's so important to know that when we move, we actually have this blood flow happening and oxygen and nutrition going to our cells. Sitting too long does not do all this, and therefore we end up with this lethargic feeling, and then weight gain, but also a start of setting in of a low mood, because exercise actually contributes to our high moods. Now that low mood is associated or is reinforced by boredom, uncertainty, and that can then result in more stress, in worry, and then anxiety. So this anxiety, it's well reported now through our media, through the medical profession, that anxiety levels have extremely increased in our society as a result of this situation. And when we go for more sweets, so more baking is fantastic. More time spent in the kitchen is brilliant, but it depends what we do in the kitchen. And so more baking has resulted in more comfort, overeating. So the weight gain is inevitable here, because the energy that we intake from that way of eating compared to the lack of energy that we put out definitely has to go somewhere, and that is weight gain. Believe it or not, more sweets means low energy, because this is a nutrition that is not providing us with what we need actually to do energy. Mood swings, because again, sweets affect our blood sugar levels, and that plays on the blood sugar level oscillating will affect our moods as well. And also this kind of nutrition where, you know, sweets and more fatty combination with salt and refined carbohydrate that we have in more baking, I guess, will reduce our immunity as well, because again, it's not providing the basic nutrition for good immunity. Now, things could be worse, of course, but it's not a very happy picture at the moment. So what's the solution? Well, the solution that we're going to take on today is actually to take care of the mind first, and not from a meditation or activity level, because that's not my expertise, but from a nutrition point of view. And I'm going to show you that actually there's so much that can be done for a good mindset, or for a good set of moods and feelings in the mind, that then will have a trickling effect on everything. Because if you have a happy mind, you have better energy, your immunity is a lot better, so you feel stronger to start with and more resilient, and all this helps to stick to a healthy routine a lot easier. And more importantly, it helps to change our current routine, adapt it very quickly, and if not very quickly, at least from now on, so that this new health routine takes into consideration the new situation, but rather than being impaired by the new situation. So just a little refresher on what happens for us to feel good in our mind. Well, we have neurotransmitters. So these are two brain cells, neurocells, that communicate with each other through those neurotransmitters, these little red bubbles here. Now, neurotransmitter goes from one cell to the next, and that's the transmission of that, everything from our thoughts, feelings, and everything. Now, when there is a lack of those neurotransmitters, either because they're not being made, or because there is lack of precursors to make them, lack of building blocks, lack of cofactors to make them efficiently, then what happens is fewer neurotransmitter means that there is a disrupted message, and we can start to have those feelings of depression, and that is then a snowballing effect. Now, please keep in mind, I'm talking here as a very general term on the basis of a healthy neurotransmission to start with. What could happen over time when nutrition is inappropriate, okay? So I'm not talking in the context of having an underlying sort of depressive condition or diagnosed condition, which obviously needs to be addressed medically as well. So what are those neurotransmitters? Well, serotonin is a happy mood neurotransmitter. Dopamine is a pleasure transmitter, neurotransmitter. We have the endorphins, which we also produce when we exercise, for instance, but that we also feel in a very short time when we consume those sweet foods and those comfort foods. So it does produce a few of those endorphins, and we think, oh, that's it, I'm feeling good. But that is very short-lived, because the constant supply of those endorphins is not maintained. So this is where nutrition can make a massive difference. So nutrition, when it is providing not just fruit and veggies, but let's say when it's providing good building blocks and cofactors, then can ensure that these neurotransmitters are being produced in the right way. Whereas on the other hand here, we by having those food, we may have short-lived good feeling, happy feelings, but overall what is going to happen is the blood sugar levels are going to, with this kind of food, will then fluctuate greatly, and fluctuate also the flow of those neurotransmitter, and that is not stable supply. So food for moods, providing the precursors and cofactors to make plenty of good neurotransmitters and promote optimal neurocell function. And what are these? Well, these are essential amino acids. Essential amino acid meaning that you need to provide those amino acids from the diet. The body cannot make them. Amino acids are the building blocks that you find in your protein foods. And so anywhere where there is protein food in the diet, you will provide those essential, those amino acids. And the essential ones are only found in very particular foods. So tryptophan and phenylalanine are very important here. You want to provide nutrient density foods. When we say nutrient dense, we mean plenty of vitamins and minerals, because these ones are important cofactors, they're triggers, they are catalysts. They need to be there for those neurotransmitters to be then produced, and then for them to be able to signal from one neuron to the other. So very important. Omega-3 fatty acids are what we call our good fats, and they are present in the cell membrane of our neurocells, or our neurons. And so for this transmission to occur really well from one to the other, you want to have really good cell membranes. And these omega-3 fatty acids integrate amongst, there's other fatty acids obviously as well, but these are very important for this good communication to take place. And then finally, we need to introduce the concept of the gut-brain axis. The gut-brain axis is this relationship between the gut, so our intestine, and the residents of our intestine. So we talk about the gut microbiota here. So this relationship between the gut, the microbiota, and the brain, that is a very dynamic relationship actually. And for the gut microbiota to be able to communicate efficiently and in the right way with the brain, we need to feed it the right kind of food. So microbiota need food as well. It's not necessarily the same vitamin, minerals, and everything that what we need, but they really thrive to those fibers in our diet. When you give them those fibers, they're going to be able to ferment those fibers. They're going to be able to grow, and they're going to be able to produce very important neurochemicals, which influence our state of mind as well. So this gut-brain axis is this bi-directional relationship where what happens in the gut, so what kind of bacteria we have, what kind of food they receive, will influence stress, anxiety, mood, and behavior. So behavior around food, whether we never feel satiated, whether we keep wanting to overeat, for example. And also the gut bacteria, believe it or not, produces those neurotransmitters as well. When we talk about the gut being your second brain, it's because it's using some of those neurotransmitters, but also it will feed into the bloodstream those neurotransmitters and potentially influence then our moods in the brain. On the other hand, though, when we are stressed and anxious and unwell, unsettled from a brain point of view, we are influencing what's happening in the gut. So the microbial balance, or the balance between your species, is extremely sensitive to stress hormones, to how you feel in the brain. And so you can create an imbalance between your gut bacteria by having too much of those stress hormones and anxiety hormones circulating in the body. So this is why I say to try to aim to take grip, to take control of our situation here, to take care about our brain through all this basically clever circle of activity is of importance. So if you're interested, obviously there's literature for you to read about this, how the gut microbiota is involved in numerous pathways of our health profile. So that influences metabolic health, so state of obesity and anything else that is related to it, systemic inflammation, type 2 diabetes, and so on. It's influencing how we feel, so how we perceive through that relationship. And at the same time, how we feel and how we perceive the world will then influence the diversity in our gut bacteria as well. And so to give a very specific example, you're consuming some foods, you will absorb vitamin and minerals, you have protein, carbohydrate, fat from that. Whatever is remaining though, so here we are in the intestinal tract, whatever is remaining, and that includes those fibers, will interact with the gut microbiota, will influence, will feed them, and that will influence their growth and which kind of bacteria grows. So plenty of fiber will promote the good bacteria growth. Now those gut bacteria will then produce those famous short chain fatty acids, acetate, propionate, butyrate, and they have a signaling effect on a number of things. I'm just taking an example here, signaling some endocrine cells in your intestinal lining to produce two very important molecules, PYY and GLP-1, which in the brain we signal satiety. I'm content, I've got enough, I don't need any more, I feel just wonderful. And that's it. So I don't need to overeat. And this is really important. So that is one of the ways that fiber in the diet will help you to control appetite, to control this overeating, these sort of cravings for extra foods. That's one way. And you want to have that signaling happening as often as possible, obviously, because then you're controlling your behavior around food. And then the other thing that those gut microbiota produce are those neuroactives, or those neurotransmitters. So 5-HT is for serotonin, noradrenaline, also GABA. And so this is used locally, but also can be signaled back to the brain and contribute to this well-being. Now, a diet that is without those fibers, a diet that is imbalanced in other type of nutrients, can create inflammation instead, and inflammation will then signal the stressful anxiety kind of symptoms and will or feelings, and will obviously not give you all those good ones, those good signaling pathways. So hence the importance. That gut-brain axis is really important. Now, this is why we need a large variety of good bacteria, and that can be helped through food. We need good food constituents to feed the good bacteria. We need these bacteria to produce a variety of good chemicals through the fermentation of those food constituents, and also creating those chemicals that will give us neurochemicals or neuro signaling for satiety, for feeling content, for feeling a lot more relaxed. Or the opposite, it can also stimulate stress if we don't give those good bacteria the good type of food as well. Okay. Now on the side, and no time here to talk about it, but a good gut microbiota profile influences our immune system. So to strengthen our immune system in many, many ways. And as I mentioned before, influences our metabolic health, the way we deal with the energy from diet, how much we absorb from the energy from diet, and therefore influences our weight as well. So some tips: take care of the mind first through nutrition. So in terms of our gut microbiota, or that gut-brain axis, we want to include daily prebiotics, probiotics, and symbiotics. So the prebiotics, what are they? Well, they're the kind of foods that the bacteria will thrive on. So thrive in particular whatever those foods provide in terms of fiber. So fiber is not just about bran, wheat bran or oat bran. Fiber is actually a group of multiple, we're talking in excess of tens, many dozens of types of fiber, and you find them in, for example, seaweed. If you were to experiment with seaweed foraging, in all sorts of mushrooms, in all your vegetables that contain a lot of fiber, in the legumes, in the whole grains. So giving this variety every day, not just once a day, but making a goal or something to tick for every day at every meal to have some kind of variety of fiber. That's really important. Now, in terms of probiotic, we're talking about foods that are fermented that will actually populate the gut with extra bacteria, and the good ones. So any fermented food really is valid here. And symbiotic foods are actually those that provide both the pre and the probiotic. So if you think of sauerkraut or kimchi, which is made with some kind of all sorts of different cabbages, when you look at it, there is extremely a lot of fermentation that has taken place, but you still have the fiber with it as well. Not everything has been fermented. So this kind of food provide you both. So it's a symbiotic. The same thing with tempeh, where it's this fermented kind of soy product, and that again gives you this combination of both. Here we've got miso, which is primarily a probiotic. You want to use the one that is in paste, not in powder. And then of course your yogurt, the real pot set yogurt, which actually you could learn to do yourself as well at home, because there's plenty of time to keep an eye on those things, and then you'll get the satisfaction of having made your own yogurt on top of it. Okay, in terms of as a second tip here is using a rainbow, or eating a rainbow of food at each meal. So here we're looking for the nutrient density. Of course, it's going to provide you with these fibers that we just talked about as well. But the idea here is to make up, I don't mean a full rainbow, of course, but you know, making a nice, colorful selection of foods that allow you to have variety of vitamin, minerals, and those things called phytochemicals, which all contributes to providing those cofactors for the production of your neurotransmitters. And how you do that? Well, you can do your smoothies, not smoothies with plenty of ice cream, but smoothie with plenty of different whole fruit, whole vegetables, spices using, you know, turmeric and gingers and herbs. And if you're growing, for example, spices or herbs as like mint or anything, and you blend that, you don't extract the juice, you blend so that you've got the combination of the fiber as well as the whole food. Now this in colder weather now can be taken as soups. You can make stews. Think of the Mediterranean ratatouille. If you don't know, look it up, where there's a lot of those vegetables being very much cooked as a stew. You can throw in also some beans with that, all sorts of baked beans. And the ratatouille is really a favorite food from the Mediterranean diet, and it's just rich of those variety. Now, I need to highlight the rainbow on top doesn't count. That is not the kind of rainbow I'm talking about. The rainbow I'm talking about is this one. And here you can see a typical food that we like to consume, perhaps at home, having pizza. Fine to have pizza, no problem at all. Just make it very colorful and rich in nutrient density. Then number 3, we need to add foods that are high in tryptophan and phenylalanine. This is primarily a list of food with tryptophan, but phenylalanine is also found in those foods as well, actually. And these are mainly the protein-containing foods. So your animal sources of protein, as well as seeds and nuts, which make fantastic snacks instead of the M&Ms and things like that. And the beans and the eggs. So to include those things on a day-to-day basis. If you are from a vegetarian sort of background or vegan background, it is fine as well, as long as you make sure to combine all those vegetarian proteins. So having whole grain with nuts and seeds, whole grain rice with nuts and seeds, having tofu, having the baked beans, having quinoa as a grain, because this will provide you with those essential amino acids as well. And then 2 more tips before we finish. I think I just have another minute or so. I would like to suggest that perhaps to start to build a new habit. Eating at home, being at home, allows you to change your routine. You don't need to eat lunch in a half an hour. You know, you don't need to, including half an hour to go get your lunch and then to have it at home. You can change the really healthy habit of having your main meal during the day. Now, there's multiple benefits for that, and I'm just going to highlight the concept of the circadian clocks, and that every organ, so this is now new in the literature, well, it's not new, but it's more identified and understood in the literature, how different organs have different circadian clocks, where they are the most efficient at functioning, at releasing those digestive enzymes, at absorbing, at metabolism, metabolizing. So having your main meal during the day, so main meal meaning the highest energy content, or at least the most energy before 3 p.m., and having a very light dinner will allow for better sleep, which means better mental health, but also will allow you to keep weight under control, because before going to bed, you don't need your 2/3 of your calories at nighttime before just going to bed. That is, it's almost a nonsense. You want to have that during the day when you are relatively active, and then your metabolism will be more efficient, so you're less likely to store fat, etc. So take this into consideration, because this is really something that is now more and more being studied, and taking that into your routine, setting up that new routine will certainly help for after whatever you do later on. You may keep that later on and adapt your lifestyle accordingly, because you'll feel so much better about it. And to finish off, my last tip, and I think I need to stop almost, my last tip is to experiment with fasting. So Plato apparently was said that he was fasting for greater physical and mental efficiency. And what I'm saying here is that fasting is a great discipline exercise. You need to find your own routine. It could be just skipping a meal, once a day. It could be to have a whole day worth of water fasting. It could be simply alternating between a normal day of eating with a day of very low energy intake, 500 calories or 2000 kilojoule only. So that's very low. And alternating that, either protocol are fine, but it's to find what suits you best and experimenting with that. With that, you're going to find that your discipline increases, and that is going to then benefit everything else that you would put in place. And besides the fact, fasting is very healthy as well. So I'm going to leave it here, because I think I'm just not long to go for a few questions. Sorry, I went over time, Louise.
Thank you so much.
And happy to hear anything. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Veronique. So many excellent suggestions there. I have a lot of things personally that I need to change, so that's good. Just to let everyone know that the presentation today has also been recorded, so we'll send out information about that. And I think there was also a very helpful tip for individual consultations. People can have those through the School of Human Movements and Nutrition Sciences, so that sounds very useful as well. There was one question, just one, that came up, but please type more if anyone in the audience has some. But there was a specific question about if there's any particular foods that help with calming. So this was a question that was asked before you started to talk about the brain-gut axis, but I think it's if there's any specific foods that might help with calming.
Okay, so if we go through the principle of take the principle of the neurotransmitters that we want to sorry, I need to end the show here. So if we take the principle of the neurotransmitter that we want to promote, so we want to promote GABA, we want to promote dopamine and serotonin, so feeling good. So having those precursors. Now, the precursors we saw from a tryptophan and phenylalanine point of view were basically foods that contain protein. So you will have, my advice in that sense is to ensure that we are reducing added sugar, we are reducing refined carbohydrate. That means crackers, that means crisp, that means white bread, that means baked goods made on those white sort of flour. If we reduce that, we're already regulating our blood sugar levels. When we regulate our blood sugar level, we make them constant, well, steady, as opposed to up and down, which is very unsettling. So that already gives a much more calming sensation. But then to always incorporate in any of your food intakes, or breakfast, lunch, dinner, or any snacks, to always have some of those foods incorporated with it. So if you're an omnivore, having cheese, not just having a fruit, but you could have fruit with a piece of cheese with it, or having your nuts and seeds as snacks, as opposed to a biscuit and so on. So having mix, you know, a little handful, small handful of mixed nuts that are raw, if even better, and to have this as a snack, as opposed to having the biscuit excuse me, and the chocolate and so on, that is going to send you into up and down. In terms of, so banana is well known to be a high in tryptophan kind of food, so that would be a good, it's a whole fruit on itself with tryptophan, but I would add still some protein foods such as nuts and seeds with it, so to not just stick to the sugary only food.
Thank you. Just one last question, and this one relates to your final slide about fasting. Mm-hmm. So what does it mean that you displace your food intake for a day to later in the day, to a cycle, or does it mean that you basically have less food for a day? Let's say you go for the 8-hour fast, or I forget.
Okay, so I because of time, I just stopped for a few of more extra slides, which I can show you now. So there's a different kind of protocol. I just point out here a couple of, 3 of the protocols. So the most logical, starting at the bottom here, would be if you went for a full day of water fast once a week, which is probably the most challenging if we're not used to it, but you can include herbal teas and light broth, and that means not consuming any food per se. I would not go any more than 24 hours. If you wanted to try something like this, a good idea is to start after your lunch and going until next lunch the next day, because the most difficult hours of feeling a little bit hungry will be during your sleep, and so that won't be a big deal. The other thing is to alternate basically a normal food eating day with a 500 calorie or 200 kilojoule day, which is really low, and we can help you to design that when you come to our consult, if you like. And so that means you have one day normal, one day of those 500 calories. Now the 5-2 protocol from, I'm sure you all know Michael Mosley with his book, was about having 2 of those days, those low calorie days per week, but just not consecutively. So you could have normal, fast, normal, fast, or you could alternate one fast, one normal, one fast, one normal. Therefore, you have more fasting days through the week. The other more novel approach that has been tested and quite successfully now with health outcome is called the time restricted feeding, where you are eating during an 8 to 10 hour window and fasting between a 14 to 16 hour window every 24 hours, and keep that on a day in, day out constant pattern. So now if you need guidance with all that, please come and talk to us and we can put a plan in place. My recommendation is to experiment and to see what best fits with you. Sorry, I've got a train passing by. Don't know if it's noisy.
That's very helpful, Veronique. I think we will have to finish up there.
That's fine.
But thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did as well. And thank you to all of the people who joined us today. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I'll just point out that it has been shown that those that do consume red wine, when they do consume alcohol, have a much greater diverse gut microbiota. So you may want to look it up as well.
Well, that's a good news story to end on. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.